across Canada. Her Métis heritage comes from her father's side, from the father's side of her family. Her father is Ken LaRoque, the 8th child of Pierre and Therese LaRoque from Duck Lake, Saskatchewan. Her mother's side of the family includes many Irish and Scottish heritage. Marion LaRoque is the 2nd child of Ralph and Margaret Eagleson. Did I get that right? Eagleson? Okay. And is originally from a small town called Alyssa Craig in southwestern Ontario. Sheila now works at the USASK Libraries and is the Indigenous Studies and Government Information Librarian. USASK is also where she did her undergraduate degree with a major in both political sciences and women's and gender studies. As a librarian, Sheila has worked in the public, academic, and special libraries sector in Toronto, Edmonton, and Saskatoon. She has always been interested in using her skill sets to develop librarianship for her community and for Indigenous communities more broadly. So take it away, Sheila.
Aww. Thanks, Kayla. I'm going to thank such a warm intro and welcome. Yeah, so I'm from a different place. So I find Vancouver and area a little bit disorienting. I find it really so different than where I'm from. I brought my sun lamp and I was packing to come here, and I was I don't know how to pack for rain. We're in the middle of a drought in the prairies. We have been for several years, and so I'm do we have do we have an umbrella? And it's no. I was do I bring my rubber boots? I don't know. What is this like? So I find it really disorienting. But when I got out of the conference yesterday and the sun was shining, and I was okay, I'm here, I can deal with this. I know how to do sun. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I just feel really welcomed here. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me. So I'm gonna set a timer for 20 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. We have some time to play with, which is really nice, but I want to hear from other people as well. So okay, timer. And I'm not really a good linear thinking. I was really glad to hear you talk about how time, and I say the same thing. I'm oh, linear time is relentless. So anyway, I think it's just violence. But anyway, so we have a timer going, 20 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so this is another thing that as a non-linear thinker, what I've done. So when I do information literacy sessions with students now, I don't like an agenda. I like goals. So goals is what we got. So we're gonna maybe hit these, maybe not in linear order, but we're gonna do our thing. So what do I have? Oh yeah, water is a connector. So talking about this stock image of waves and the ocean. So when I as I mentioned, I'm a little bit disoriented coming here, but because I don't have a relationship with the ocean normally. I think so I think. But I do have a relationship with water as the rivers. So the rivers that go through Saskatoon, and Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan means fast flowing rivers in Cree. So thinking about that and thinking about the drought and what we're going through in terms of abundance, and then uh I guess I'll say lack, or want. So lack in a biblical sense. Yeah. So anyway, thinking about that, so water is the connector, and water as the importance. So water is really what brings us together. And so yeah, thinking about that when I was thinking about this, what to say. So when I'm talking with students, I talk a lot about different lenses. So we use different tools for different different things that we're doing. So we have a juxtaposition of a microscope and a telescope. So looking at different aspects of both like the smallest part that makes us up and the biggest part as well, and connecting beyond. So I often find myself saying that science or any sort of knowledge seeking activity, research, what we're doing, is a group project. And it was also touched upon a bit this morning already about like how everyone needs to do their part and like what we're doing. So like we are all working on this together, these different truth building activities that we're going about in our days, because the truth and knowledges are so big that we can't possibly do it all ourselves. So that's what I say when I'm like talking to students, especially when we're trying to do our research and seeing what works and what doesn't. If we get like, for example, millions of hits on Google Scholar, or like a dozen or so within like a smaller niche database, we're doing what needs to be done. Yeah. Oh, yep. Right. Yeah. So, in thinking of like, so going from this, so the different tools that we use to like a personal history or a community history, not only are we like literally crossing fonds and thinking about that, but we're also crossing timelines. And so we touched about that like in the past few days about time, and like what how we can like collapse timelines and bringing the past and present and future closer together than they necessarily were. So it's kind of a neat thing that we can do. So when we're doing our research, not only are we interacting with our past, but we're also bringing the past into our future, right? So that's what I find the need for digital archives and like the need for our work to continue. Um, Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to, yeah. So the need for our work to continue and building upon it and why we are doing the things that we are doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like some projects that I have percolating. This is like really nice. So like this winter term was like rough on me. It was just a lot of busyness, which is fine. But now we're at the beginning of summer term, so it's gonna be great. And we're gonna get so much work done. Anyway, it's like good to, I know everyone laughs, and I was like, yeah, I know, like the lies I tell myself every summer, but whatever, it's fine. It's fine. So like this is like a really good like aspirational talk. So this is what I'm gonna do, I promise. But yeah. So I've been involved with the North shared print project. So this is a shared print project across Canada and like across also like different institutions. So mainly academic libraries are involved right now, but there's also public and other places too. So the shared print project has 3 different streams. So Canadiana, what that means, government information, and Indigenous works. So I'm the chair of the Indigenous works stream. So what does that mean? That was like a really something for us to like grapple with. Like, what is an Indigenous work? Like what? So like if you don't know, there's a lot of like national and like international like organizations like across Canada for libraries. So one of them is called COPL, which is the Council of Prairie and Pacific University Libraries. I think I got that right. Maybe I I did it. Amazing. So COPL has an Indigenous historical publications working group. I'm not on that, so because there's only so much time, linear time, relentless. But there's only so much time that I have, so I'm not on that. But we are building upon the work that was done by that. So by that group. So we did, so obviously COPL has a Western Canada focus, but we did like hire student to do some research about newspapers and serialized publications within Eastern Canada as well. So now we have an amazing spreadsheet of like where Indigenous newspapers are within Canada libraries. So that's really cool. So we're gonna work on that. And in terms of like a shared print aspect, what do I have next? Okay, yeah. So now that we know where all of these newspapers lie, not to rest, but like rest temporarily, it's the work that that lays before us is reaching out to these communities, letting them know like, hey, okay, we have copies of your newspapers where they lie. And thinking about what the role of a shared print initiative is in terms of digitization. So now that materials we're in a weird kind of like digitization. Some things are digital, some things are digital and not accessible. Some things it's just a bit of a mishmash across the entire country. So bringing together what the interests of communities are and what is appropriate. Because while we've talked about this a little bit, but like, does everybody want to have their community newspaper like up? And I mean, the answer might be yes, like, yes, spread it out there, but it also might be no. So really understanding what is appropriate. So that's that project. I would also like to, okay, so there's so many moving parts, which is fine. But so as North No, we are also a member of NICLA. So NICLA stands for why am I doing this to myself? Rem yes, National Indigenous Knowledge Language Alliance and its French translation. Yeah, so yes, amazing. So it's a alliance of different GLAM institutions, so galleries, we know, yeah, libraries, archives, museums, cool. So the project that they have really taken forward and like is at the cusp of being born and out into the world is the Respectful Terminology Project. So I don't really want to speak more about like work that I'm not involved in, but just know that like they're working on it. In fact, Kayla's like going to Chilliwack tomorrow and like talking about these things, so we can talk more about that. Yeah, so because Indigenous, like briefly, I could say that Indigenous people have been seen as the subjects of study, but not necessarily like the creators of Indigenous knowledge that's worthy of respect in and of itself. So that's why we end up with systems that have been built not by us, but like, and that describe us very inaccurately. Um, at as well as offensively. So, yeah. So one of the things that happens in the library world when information is incorrect, we really like to like correct it and be right. That's like my personal kink. I guess. It's like I was like, don't say kink. And then I was like, you know what? say the weird thing. I was like, yeah, it's fine. I was like, anyway, so being right is like my thing. I like love it anyway. So it's like makes me so happy. So yeah, and like that's why I've been hired to do that and be right. For many things, right? Right? Yeah, anyway. I was like, don't say it, but anyway, it was there. Whatever, it's fine. It's totally fine. Yeah, so like these systems aren't right in many regards. But yeah, so making them right in many aspects. Okay, cool. So now I have like some like ideas that like I'm really inspired over hearing about like what's possible with the Omeka S platform. I've been trained on it when I was in library school a while ago. But I haven't actually like used it yet. So I'm like really excited to like take these ideas that I've had for a while and like run with them. Um so yeah, I just hold on. I just want to okay. Okay. So like if and I want to talk to people who have more experience with the platform. I'm looking at certain places. And like maybe this is like possible to like bang out within 20 minutes and I just don't know, but maybe it's let's oh yeah, and I'm going to do all this project work in the summer too, right? Like so anyway, one of the things that I do, so there's a program in Saskatchewan called SUNTEP. So SUNTEP stands for Saskatchewan Urban Native Teachers Education Program. They've been around for, I want to say 30 or so years, maybe 40. Anyway, it's a program to like teach mainly Métis, but a lot of like other like urban native folks. Um, how to be teachers. And so one of the classes that they take within this program is called Indigenous Studies 280, which is history of prairie or Métis history across the prairies or something like that. Anyway, and one of the assignments that they do is we travel to Winnipeg and build an ancestor chart. So like who our ancestors are and like do like some deep archives work. I was able to go twice and like going to Winnipeg and I had never been to Winnipeg, which is weird, but the orientation in Saskatchewan is very like Alberta focused. So like Treaty 6 territory crosses the provincial borders between Saskatchewan and Alberta. So yeah, I had like never been to Winnipeg and I was like, is this like Winnipeg? Like the center of like the Métis universe? And I was like in my friend's car, we were driving around and I was like, is this the Red River? Like the Red River? Like, are you serious? And she was like, yeah, and this light at the end of the bridge like takes a long time. So we're gonna be on the Red River for a while. I was like, this is like the center of like our cosmology. She's like, anyway. Yeah, so we do like have like our records of especially like with script. So I don't know what people know about the history of the West, but it was script records. So oh, it's on the screen. So SCRIP. That is how those are the receipts, is what I tell students. Those are the receipts of how land theft occurred with Métis communities. So you could either at the time that you took script, your family took script, you could either choose land or you could choose money. And like personally in my family history, a lot of our ancestors took money because land like didn't make sense. Like how could you can't take land? Doesn't make what? Like that doesn't, it's not how it works. So yeah, we took money and then ended up buying land. So we have a record of also like how the river lot system worked. So long skinny tracts of land, so that everybody was like living closer to each other. So it's not like people were like spread out across the prairies. Everyone was gathered geographically along the river, and everyone could share land and water that way. Because as I mentioned, water can be there's different times when water can be scarce in the prairies. So um yeah, we know where these places are. So we have these like maps, and I wanted to use the Omeka-esque platform to like create like a digital homeland. So because we know where the land was that was taken from us, we can also like gather in other maps too. So I used to cover geography and urban planning, but I don't anymore. So when I did cover that, like a lot of times, like people would get like sent up to like the maps area to look at like the RM maps, like rural municipalities. So like maps of like who owns what land. So we do have like record of like what the land like used to look like in our systems of that have been destroyed, and like how maps and land, who owns what, and how that's there now. So we do have like a record of this, and like seeing where people are, and like the class as they're like building their ancestors, they're like their ancestry chart, they're finding like who are my people, and where were they, and where did they come from, and like, and who were your people, and are we distant cousins, and like so building on that, and then creating like a digital space where people could upload their records as well. So because science is a group project, and so is research, a lot of people who go into SUNTEP have had family members that have gone into SUNTEP. And so they're building on like the genealogy and like the work of previous people. So which is like really interesting. And like a lot of times people get like really like sort of checked out with like doing genealogy research, unless this is their thing, and like this is their particular like flavor of nerd, is like how I describe it. Like it's hard to get into, and like archival research from like a student perspective it can be like really like daunting, and really like this isn't working. So then it's not easy. I can't just like Google it, and you have to really like dig and like find things, especially things that previously have been hidden. So yeah, I would just like love it to see like if people could like build upon this, and like SUNTEP alumni could like put in their like records, like because we know where we come from and we have these records. um yeah, and I would just like love to see that. And then oh yeah, building upon that idea. Oh, okay, I'm gonna be so quick. That was 20 minutes. I can't believe that. But like it's totally cool. I'm gonna be like super quick. So like building upon that idea, we do have like and I don't know if this is like a silly idea or not, but like we also do have like a record of like the skies. So we do like know that. So understanding of like what the events that were happening within the stars at certain times, we have records of that. Like we know when celestial events like certain like comets appeared, and like at the time of like treaty signings, like these are events that we know. If you look up the special rock at the Royal Alberta Museum, that in Edmonton, yeah, can you say yes, yes, yes. Yeah, so we know these, and we have can you just say it one more time? The Manitou Stone. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So that came from a scientific perspective as a meteor, but anyway, from a Métis and other perspective, it was not. So yeah. Okay, being really quick. Okay, Wakotowin. This is a Cree word. It's can be thought of as kinship. But that's the literal translation of it. But Wakotowin is like a system of natural law, and like a system of order, and like how things are. So within this system of Wekotowin, there's responsibility, accountability, kinship, and relationality. And so those are ways of being and like knowing and being and like operating throughout the world and how we operate within both with ourselves and then the world with each other. So this is a quote by our other friend, Jessie Lawyer, who is a Cree Métis librarian now at U Alberta. But librarians are responsible for building a student's research capacity. So if we have half the students who are kind of like frustrated with like doing genealogy work and like checked out and like maybe that like freeze is a bit of a trauma response to like records of like land theft and like things that have happened to us. So then we need to build something that is motivating to students. We just need to find the right motivation for people and then they'll do it. So yeah, if we can, because a lot of the times like students will ask me like, but what are we doing? Like, what does this mean? And I'm like, we're building a story of what our ancestors did, and we're building like our further knowledge. And like, I think if we could like see that within an Omeka platform, I think that would be really fruitful. Also, yeah, my cousins are up to cool things. So quickly, my favorite cousin, yeah, you're not supposed to have favorites, but like parents aren't supposed to have favorites, and I'm not a parent. And so these are my favorite cousins. So my favorite cousin, Brent, he is the environmental director of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. They have been doing some awesome work. They've got like 5,000 more acres of land at Batoche. That was a thing. We now have our own buffalo herds again. So like dealing with like that. Also, program that he's starting up is the Métis Guardians Monitoring Network. So science, Western science, is built upon careful observation over time and like looking at different factors and how things have changed. So as we are out in the land doing what we do, like hunt and pick berries and fish and all that, the volunteers will be monitoring land change. Yes, climate change and the effects of that on the land actively. So if we could take that data and input that into a platform, that would be great. As well, like building upon, yeah, like so Métis, like the Métis history is like very much history of like working class like people, so like the people that actually went out and did like the doing of the fur trade, like going out into the bush and like bringing back all those stacks of beaver pelts, and like recording like the weather at the forts and like all of that. Like we have record of what the land was and what it is now. My other favorite cousin, Colin, who's a prof at he's the head of the soil science department in the College of Agriculture and Bioresources at USASK. He also has a lab. So his thing is tree rings. So he has a dendrochronology, I think, yeah, dendrochronology lab. So measuring how we what tree rings can teach us about climate change. So he's like pretty cool. And so he does a lot of research like on our land. So the family farm like we have, like my parents live there now. So they kind of like, my parents are like the best. Like they have like the best Métis existence. Like they have a condo in Saskatoon where they spend the winter, and then in the summer they go out on the family land, like our farm, and like are in the bush, and like it's I can't wait to retire. It's gonna be so good. So like that's like my dream. So Colin does a lot of like work with he has like drones for like monitoring things, and like a project that he was doing was like looking back, like using drones on like where the 1885 like resistance like sites were. So we like know what happened on what days and like where those sites are. So like the changes from then till now and like observing it. So it's like pretty neat stuff that we can do and that we could like all link together with what is happening now. Yeah, that I like am so over my time, which I'm sorry, but I wanted to like talk to other people too. So like find me on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Just gonna
Oh,
try and get out of this
yes.
so that we can set it up for the next one.
Yes.
Oh, we'll figure this out after. Okay. So for our next presenter, I have the privilege to call up Dana Claxton. And Dana is a critically acclaimed artist who works in video, film, photography, single and multi-channel video installations, and performance art. And I don't know if anyone had the opportunity to see her video, her film last night, but it was amazing. It invoked a visceral reaction in myself, especially the metal-edged Hollinger boxes. I thought about those all the way home, and the connection with those and Indigenous material items and knowledges and histories and stories. So her practice investigates Indigenous beauty, the body, the social, political, and spiritual. Her work has been shown internationally at the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Walker Art Center, Sundance Film Festival, Salt Lake City, and much more. Her work is held in public, private, and corporate collections. She is a professor at the head of the Department of Art History, Visual Art, and Theory at the University of British Columbia, and a member of the Mood Mountain Lakota First Nations located in southwestern Saskatchewan. However, she currently resides in Vancouver, Canada. So come on up, Dana.
So thank you, Kayla and Sheila, as well as Sarah and Karen and everybody else who's organized this event. It's been wonderful to be part of. And I thank all of you for being here today as well. I guess I want to just preface this by saying that I'm a performance artist as well as a poet. And so that's kind of where this presentation will take us to. My talk is called Interpreting Indigenous Histories Through Digital Artwork. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that was shown last night. And that was part of a commission as a result of this event. So thank you for that commission as well, videoing. Oh, closer? Okay, thank you. So art and artworks can reveal the interiority of cultures and bring forth creation stories, from raven bringing the light to talking and flying stones, buffaloes turning into people and people turning into buffaloes. Indigenous histories, as told by the people, maintain teachings and legends, magic and spirit. Little people in the forest or by the lake, sky people in the above worlds, and the two-headed serpent in the sea. Giants of stone and thunderbirds with wings span so large they can cover your house or your library. Of the shapeshifter with so much mana, who can change into sometimes a barn swallow and send a cloud into your dream, so you knew and so you know you were cared for. Or what of the woman who ran and ran so fast that she jumped up in the air, and as she pushed forward, she transformed into eagle. Her nose became a beak, her hair became feathers, her arms became wings, her hands became talons. And as she flew, above all, looking and seeing, she looked to the east. She was flying to her nest. Indigenous histories maintain and contain and are made up of and include cosmological creation stories, stories and beliefs, giants and little people, sky people, the four-leggeds who talk, Sasquatch who speaks several indigenous languages and then becoming invisible. Poof! Sasquatch can go into the fifth dimension right before your very eyes. Indigenous histories include and are made of song and dance, the medicine dance, the round dance, the grass dance, the prairie chicken dance, the mass dancers, the sun dancer, the jingle dress dancer, and so many more. All the regalia, everything worn on the body, the embellishments, all the adornments, every cone, bead, bell, and ribbon, every feather, sinew, hair tie, leggin, moccasin, medallion, all that moves while the dancers dance, are Indigenous history. I dance so the people may live, and we dance so the people may live. The song confirms territories and names. Words are sung so the people may live. The song confirms the history. The song confirms the song, and the history confirms the song. The singers sing so the people can dance. The singer sings so the drum can drum. The singer sings history in every breath. The breath of the singer sings history. History is here, and it's 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 here. And as we move from the present to history, Indigenous spirit moves with us. It is here, and it is here, and it is here, and it is here, and it is here. As Indigenous spirit moves, we move with it. It also moves into the digital realm of artworks. The Indigenous artist practitioner brings Indigenous history into the digital artwork by way of bringing cultural aesthetics, sometimes song and dance, and bringing worldviews into the fold. The fold, sometimes so dark and lonely. The Western fold, without Indigenous history, could stay limp, could lose its shape if the shape was substantial to begin with. Can the fold without Indigenous history be complete? Or does the fold need constant refolding in order to be complete? Within the folding lay the shadow. It's right there. I think it's right there. Multiple folds equal multiple shadows. And within those folds and shadows, if indigeneity does not exist within the folded shadow, what does exist in here then? I'm not sure how a line might exist within the shadow, within the fold. Or does the imperialist fold, if there's such a thing? And is there such a thing as the imperialist shadow, and how do they exist? How long can the imperialist fold and the imperialist shadow exist without indigeneity? Can the shadow exist without indigeneity? Can the fold exist without indigeneity? I'm not sure. The great unknown fold. Can the fold know itself without indigeneity or without an Indigenous shadow? Or what about an Indigenous fold with an imperial shadow? That doesn't sound good. The Delusian fold is open-ended and non-exclusive. The folding and refolding, creating interiority, which is not free from the outside. Yet the fold remains and maintains power. If the outside of the fold was exclusionary, how does the twirling motion of the unfolding let Indian data in? The Jungian shadow, one's id or the consciousness, and as the ego resists, the shadow is then projected. What of the Western archives folds ego, resisting Indian data and the shadow of such? Shadows can be blind spots, and we need to stitch to suture the gaps. Pardon me. And with the stitching, of course, comes pain. because something has been poked or ruptured. Do the fold and the shadow both need collapse in order to be horizontal? The goal of the archive should be horizontality. Everything can exist in the totality of the archive once it becomes horizontal. Can the feather reside in the archive? Eagle, hawk, owl, or crow? The textures and lines so smooth. The location it was found, the body who wore it, the hat it was on, the dance band it hung on to. And what of stone? 10 stones in the archive, indicating place-based identity, indicating storied territories. Let the stones stay. Abalone shells in the archive, clustering together, representing place and water, even mountains and space. Abalone in the archive reads salmon woman in the sea, reads like cedar mass made from the tree. There were 3 drums in the archive, one made of elk, one made of deer, and I'm not sure of the other one. Sometimes we don't know everything that's in the archive. The 3 drums in the archive all make different sounds, all made by different makers, all have different colors. This one, I don't know what it is. This one, I do know what it is. It's deer. Nice sound. This one's made of elk. Oh, it's a little bit, needs to be warmed up a bit. But this one's made of elk. It might not warm up right now. But there were 3 drums in the archive. Also in the archive was the rattle. The rattle and drums are often used for healing. With the suture, there is the wounded archive being healed by Indigenous data, the wounded imperial archive being healed by Indigenous data. Does the wound have a fold or a shadow? The wound has a fold and a shadow. The fold is a wound. The shadow is a wound. The shadow is a fold. The wound is a fold. The wound is a shadow. The shadow as a fold. As fawns shift and get stitched, the wound, the shadow, and the fold all convene. The convening that takes place in the fawns that include now the stitch and the wound, the shadow and the fold, begin to emerge as a transformed fawn with healed wounds by the stitch, but there's still shadow. As shadow never disappears completely, but has the potential to transform and shrink even, I think. I really don't even know. The shrinking shadow upon the fawns with the appearance of Indian data. Oops. As the shadow lingers, sometimes more prominent than other times less, the fold of the fawns turns inside out, also shifting inside its own inclusion, which exclusion must exist. Can the fold ever have no exclusion? Perhaps in its folding and unfolding, as inclusion or exclusion are repeatedly bent, becoming in contact with each other as a result of the fold. The fold comes into contact with itself. Interiority and exteriority bend into each other, and I'm not certain this cancels exclusion. A fold is hard, a bend is elastic. Perhaps the fold can ever only be a thing where inclusion and exclusion exist at some point, and by being so, does the wound continue, as does the shadow. Perhaps they need each other in order to exist. But there's the ordering of things that get murky. Verticality in the fawns, verticality in the fold, verticality in the wound, verticality in the shadow are these hierarchies within the fawn's fold, wound, and shadow. So now we have the fawns, the fold, the wound, and the shadow. And then here comes the Indian in the fawns. The sounding of the Indian, and I say Indian in the fawns through digital data. In Fonds Crossing, which some of us saw last night, I was attempting to show value in stone and drum and feather as contributors to Indigenous fawns. I worked with Indigenous vessels and non-Indigenous stores boxes. Edges are interesting, the curve and the hard edge, the square and the rectangle, the circle and the round, not as opposites, but in relation to each other. The circle also needs the squares. The square needs the circle. What is the hope of decolonizing the archive or indigenizing the fond? It appears that many hope decolonizing the archive or the fond will make a better world, but for whom? To decolonize is to acknowledge that great harm has been bestowed upon those who have been colonized. Here we are again at the wound. So now we have descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized decolonizing the archive together. That might be love, right? Decolonial love. Decolonizing the archive together, or education or art history. I mean, everything's sort of going through, as we know, the academy is currently, everything's being decolonized. But you know, who is benefiting, right? Who is benefiting? Is river or air? And how does decolonizing the academy serve Indigenous and non-Indigenous? How does it serve the Indigenous and non-Indigenous academic? The academy, that great place of learning. And what Antonio Gramsci called professors, elite, or soldiers of the elite. And, you know, when I read that, it kind of slayed my heart, thinking, ooh, what a description of professors, soldiers of the elite. But he pointed out the kind of class reproduction that happens consistently in the academy. And so, and over again. So what of these hauntings? So now we have hauntings with the shadow, with the wound, and the fawns. So the fawns archives have been going through processes of decolonization. And by way of doing so, Indigenous methodologies and perhaps worldviews are being placed gently within the fond. And through that gift, the fond loses some of its hard edges and softens within the curve. The fold needs a curve or two. So now we have the gift in the fawns. Sometimes we can actually touch the bones and the beads without mediation of rubber gloves. The vaults are a different kind of fawns and archive than the ones that we're discussing at this conference. But now there is sort of a fawns with, or a vault within what I'm thinking. Decolonization acts to reveal and unpack the brutality of history and the present to locate where power has harmed, and by doing so, locate the wound. And within locating the wound, that's where the stitching begins. The wound and the stitching and the scar. Now we have the wound, the stitch and the scar and the fond. Indigenous methodologies often include a relational approach to the task at hand. The hope that Indigenous methods combined with decolonization can create something better, something kinder, something gentler. I'm uncertain what is achievable, and as I and we live in hope, we hope for the wound to heal. So now we have hope in the fawns. Cree scholar and artist, the late and great Hasu Muskegon Iskew, in his article, Drum Beats to Drum Bites, Globalizing Networked Aboriginal Art, he comments, quote, Indigenous media artists around the world are deeply engaged with and provide important contributions to interdisciplinary and cross-community dialogues about cultural self-determination. These works explore and bear witness to the contemporary relevance of the histories of Indigenous oral cultures and profound connections to their widely varying lands. They also reveal the creative drive that is at the heart of Indigenous survival. The cultures of an animistic people require continual sensitivity to and negotiation with cultures of all the beings and forces of their interconnected worlds. End of quote. Thank you, Ahasu. Ahasu reveals that media, digital art, bring forth Indigenous worldviews that are inhabited by spirit, and these truths and realities are part of a living culture and that everything is connected. So now we have animism and bearing witness in the fawns. So in the fawns, there's the fold, the wound, the shadow, the hauntings, the gift, the stitch, the scar, hope, animism, and bearing witness. Combined, the fawns and so many fawns are crossing each other. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. So we had planned for possibly a very small discussion, but we are coming up on time. So I think we'll move into possibly questions, and then we can also discuss amongst ourselves also kind of what's been going on the last couple of days. But I did want to just thank the organizers, especially for having so many Indigenous faces in spaces and IMPOC and queer folks in spaces, because it's important for us to be included in these conversations, as we often are bringing in concepts like two-eyed seeing into academia, into institutions, into colonial areas. And I think even when we start speaking to each other and when we start working with each other, we can start to kind of untangle some of these really messy situations and policies that have grown out of things like colonialism and deep misunderstanding of Indigenous peoples in our worldviews, in our lifeways. And I even was thinking and chatting with Sheila about this morning, even when we're thinking about kind of concepts such as we talked about orphan data yesterday, for us, and this is what I was chatting with Sheila about, I don't think there is, if we're using Indigenous worldviews and understandings, I don't think there is necessarily something like orphan data. We have our own kinship systems. We have our own adoption policies. As long as there is somebody from that community or someone who agrees to steward information, when it comes to Indigenous data, there is no such thing as orphan data. So just to kind of think, also very quickly, the concept of two-eyed seeing came up earlier. And I was just wondering, within your own works, how do you bring in the concept of two-eyed seeing into the profession, into your teaching practices? And then how do you help students or other folks to kind of balance two-eyed seeing or disrupt, not balance, two-eyed seeing within their own approaches? Whoever wants to go first, I will pass the mic.
Sure. Thank you. So two-eyed seeing, it's contested, but also like I think helpful for us to understand. And it comes from like seeing like as it says, like seeing in both ways and seeing both ways. So when I tell people I cover Indigenous studies and government information, oftentimes people will be like, oh, that's two different things. Like that's totally different. And I'm like, yes, but no, it's the same two different sides of the same colonial coin. Yesterday in several presentations, the work of Eve Tuck and Yang came up, like decolonization is not a metaphor. And I like talk about that all the time. And I'm like, yes, it's literally not a metaphor. Like it's literally the government that did it. So if we want to know like the text of the treaties, we can easily find that. It's on the government website. Like with the departments always change, which is so annoying to GovInfo like librarian. But like the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations, like that's where it is. Like that's where that comes from. So my dream, my dream is like to see a bunch of people who are Indigenous studies majors like go out into the world and like have like really robust research skills so that they can then like find things like from our own communities and like Indigenous research, all of that like methodology, but also like not like to be really literate when it comes to finding government information, because it's the governments that did this problem. So yeah, finding it all and being able to work with it and like speak against it, I think is really important. So that's my dream. I don't know if you want to speak to that or
The two-eyed seeing? I'm good.
So one other thing that I just have, and I think this comes out of your work last night, Dana, is thinking about preservation. So archivists very much so are all about preservation, but I know within a lot of communities, preservation looks different, or the understanding of what should be kept, how we keep things, how knowledges should be kept is very different. And yesterday I wrote down embracing fragility, because nothing is ever 100% perfect. And in archives, we spend so much money buying those very expensive Hollinger boxes to keep things perfect, bookbinding materials, items like that. But when we look at things like beadwork, we have beads that are out of place for reasons to remind us that nothing is perfect, or that our lives are not perfect. We are not perfect as people. But within Western culture, coming from the standpoint of a librarian and archivist who stewards collection, it is all about preservation. We can't have cedar hanging above doors because that might bring in bugs or things like that. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk about the idea of what should be preserved, what should not be preserved, or in a digital space, how do we bring in those ideas and worldviews about keeping things into a digital collection or digital space?
Well, I guess thinking about, repatriation and cultural ancestors and those kind of things. And it's really, for those things, up to the communities of what they want to do with the mask. If they want to burn the mask, there should be no colonial strings attached or anything like that. But I think for those expensive boxes that you're talking about, is that, there's part of them that are completely necessary, right, to preserve the document. And those documents are helpful in a number of different contexts to studying history. But yes, as I'll quote Antonio Gramsci again, who I'm in love with at the moment. So he's my crush. But let the poem limp. Like, just sometimes you just have to let things limp and not control or think that you have control over it all.
I am definitely going to take that back to work with me next week, that Sheila, we don't have control of it all. So we have some time for questions, about 10 minutes. I know lots of folks have questions for both Dana and Sheila, and we have online questions I can see. So I will open up the floor to folks so you can start conversation with these two brilliant Indigenous women up here and other folks. There are three. Oh, me. Oh, okay. I was like, wait, there's three what? I was like, yeah. Any questions? Sure, that sounds good. Oh, there's no questions. You always have questions. Let's just pass it over here.
So thanks to both of you. I just love the tenor of the talks. They were beautifully complimentary. Thank you so much. And I just wondered, Sheila, could you talk a little bit more about maps and the work that you were doing with GIS and mapping, and how you see some of those, thinking about your mapping history and work, and how that work can, you know, both be of aid. Certainly, maps have been really important with land claims and all of those kinds of questions. And so if you could kind of bring your mapping head into the conversation about pulling together a holistic archive.
Sure. Is this working? This mic?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'll just stand. So yeah, I have been asked to help with different research inquiries with like land claim stuff. Okay. So a lot of like Métis, there's been a lot of like problems with like Métis consultations when it comes to like land claims. So I know, especially in BC, but a lot like it still happens like at home where I'm from, like our homelands, that like a lot of times like Métis like people like nation groups will be like consulted over like the First Nations people who are have like a longer claim to land. So and like the duty to consult was like, oh well, we'll just find the most friendly Indigenous group that we have, and like oftentimes that's like Métis groups that come up. So the tools of colonization include like the map, the museum, and the gun. Forget who that is from, but someone will look that up and correct me, and it'll be great. But yeah, so when it comes to map making and like I think a lot of like the record of like land transfer and like land like claims has been hidden for so long and like has been manufactured out of our place. So we think when we think of the prairies, we think of like this like untouched like which and in reality, like a lot of like the prairie landscape is like a very manufactured, like agricultural dominant space that like has changed so much over time. So yeah. So it's not neutral in any means. I have some experience like working with like GIS stuff, not as much. This is when I like tap colleagues and I'm like, okay, I got this far. I'm like, right, and now here I am. But I think like just below the surface of like any like mapping and like land navigation, if you will, like is so fraught. It's so a difficult terrain to traverse, if you will. So yeah, it's a can of worms to say the least. I don't know. Do okay, okay. Okay. Sure.
Hello. Thank you both very much for your talks. I'm taking in so much. And I think sort of this through line that I've got from listening to you both is again the idea of not being the author of our own histories and trying to read that back in and having very different approaches to that from me here. And it's always this question that keeps in my mind is like, what is for public consumption and what is too sacred to be out? And so how do you navigate these as, you know, archivists and artists who are still part of Resurgence, but also wanting to keep things close?
I was thinking about the what co-authoring is and collaboration is, you know, I think is so much more interesting to co-write together. And I've done that a couple of times now with Tanya Willard, where we've co-authored essays together. And then at some point we don't quite know who wrote what. And it's not about who wrote what, it's that we've collaborated, you know, we've co-authored something and come up with some ideas together. But and thinking about what co-authorship is when researching Indigenous subject, you know, there's a lot of I think co-authorship that goes on without credit for that. But in terms of the sacred and the mundane, I suppose. But I think it's an individual choice for as much as there's the collective, because we're always part of the collective, but you also make individual choices. It's been part of my own Lakota teachings, is that I'm an individual who's part of the tribe and my commitments to the tribe. But so then when it comes to the ceremonial life or sacred life, and myself as a sun dancer, there's just there's a fine line, and when when you cross, you don't want to cross it. You're taught never to cross it, but that's also, it's your line, right? So for some people, you might have crossed something maybe too much, and so, but there's no rule. There's not a hard rule, because I don't think that would be. There's just so many different nations and ceremonies, but that it's you don't want to cross. You try not to cross it.
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit more. So yeah, co-authorship and like sacred, yes, all of this. In the last couple years, I've really gotten into like evidence synthesis. So like literature reviews and systematic reviews and like all that kind of stuff. That like skill set. So when it comes to like Indigenous data sovereignty and like health data, that's where things get really tricky. Indigenous people are the most studied people globally, but that doesn't translate in, which you would think, because we're so studied, that we would be the benefits of that research, and we would be then therefore like the most healthiest population, but that's not the case. And like where I come from, so treat like I love being on these territories, I have to say, about like hearing all about like the unceded territories. Yes, like that's I love that. It's so powerful. But a lot of like there is a misconception that like the number treaties were treaties of like land surrender, and that's not the case. So we were like, the treaties are treaties of friendship and peace, and like how we're going to go forward with our relationship as we share the land together. The thing that I'm coming back around. So the thing that makes Treaty 6 unique is that Treaty 6 was the only treaty that mentions like the medicine chest clause, and we have interpret that now as like a spirit of like healthcare and like seeking wellness together. So when I'm training people, so coming back around again, when I'm training people like to do like evidence synthesis and to use like PubMed and like those sorts of like databases in order to find like information about research that has been done, including like some unsavory where like things have been taken from us and not been conducted in a good way. What do we do when we find that information then? What is our responsibility to, and like, yeah, so stay tuned. There's a publication that's coming out, I promise. So I don't want to talk too much about it, but like I just want to plant that little seed of like, what do we do when we come across like information that is unsavory? Do we then, and like building upon like what's our duty then to do something? Do we just like screen it out and like not include it within our, or do we then like have a responsibility to like act upon what we found?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really tricky. And this is when it comes to specifically with items that are sacred, at Huihua, we steward, and I know we're like right over time. We steward a lot of information that, is stolen by early ethnographers and published within monographs, which is now copyrighted by early ethnographers. So that kind of like legalese issues that we come into. And then also being in a publicly funded institution, we have a duty to make those items publicly available, right? So when we're coming up against communities saying this is a sacred item, these are sacred teachings, knowledges within this published item, we have our own protocols at the branch that we follow, that we're trying to get into policy at the university, which is hard to get past. University lawyers, they are a pain in my butt on it. And I know Michael very well. We are on first name basis now. But we have our own way of, especially as Indigenous folks, as working within institutions, of working with items, with working with communities. So for us specifically, and working also with the Dialogue Center as they handle items that are much more sensitive than what we have necessarily at the branch. But we are trying to work with Musqueam, our host nation, on if we cannot directly reach out to a community. So if we think, working with our students, with ourselves, if we find items that have sacred knowledge in it or that we know to, reaching out to those communities, asking them what they would like us to do with these items. We have the power within the branch to suppress item records. We can do that. I have a box in my office called Kayla's Box of Shame. It's not the shame in the communities. It's we just don't know what to do with it. So we are currently working with our host nation, Musqueam, to have some type of policy like the Museum of Anthropology has within their human remains collection, where they have a room wrapped in cedar boxes, in cedar, and they go through Musqueam protocol when interacting with these items. So trying to come up with some type of policy and protocol, and we can bring protocol into archives and library spaces to help with kind of keeping these stories and these sacred items with those communities and being the best stewards that we can. And hopefully the Dialogue Center can help us with that. So yes, that is, I digress. Anyways, we have time for a break. We are over time. Time for a break before our next presenter.